These are book notes for Shoe Dog, the autobiography of Phil Knight, and it's mostly an origin story of Nike. So with this exercise, I'm trying to go through, on the left side, we have just 3 stories. So I just thought of 3 stories. So Mount Fuji, Falcon vs. Dimension 6, and Waffle Irons. Then in this second column, I try to, so from each story, I pull an idea from it. And then from that idea, I try to go through 3 connecting ideas or 3 related topics. So again, we'll start with Mount Fuji. So in the book, Phil Knight talks about meeting a woman on Mount Fuji, and it was one of his first relationships, like serious relationships. And back then, this was in before the internet and before all of that, so he would just have to write letters to her, and then she would show up on his doorstep one day, to his surprise. So this is just the idea of making connections anywhere. He didn't expect to meet someone on Mount Fuji that would end up being his girlfriend. He doesn't end up marrying her, but he does seem to have learned a lot. It seems like he learns a lot from that experience. So just this idea of connecting everything. I've been doing this 9 connections exercise as just like a written version, and now I'm trying this video version to see if I can connect things even more. It also makes me think of, doing this exercise makes me think of Amos Tversky. So Amos and Daniel Kahneman are the subjects of the book The Undoing Project, which covers like it's a biography of the 2 of them, and I guess, yeah. And something that I liked in it, so Daniel Kahneman was the author of Thinking Fast and Slow, and with Amos Tversky, it's based on the ideas that Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman researched together. So just something from that book is Amos Tversky says actually like metaphor is not that great for explaining ideas. It can kind of make people think they understand something, but it can mask the actual like truth behind the idea. But that's okay. I'll get better at going like beyond metaphors and hopefully kind of like learning different topics and different subjects completely. But for the most part, this 9 connections thing is just trying to come up with metaphors that might be weak and might be good. So anyway, another idea from this idea of connecting anything is, or this Mount Fuji story was just that I didn't know that Nike had such origins in Japan, and Phil Knight and his Blue Ribbon distribution company started as a distributor of Onitsuka shoes. So yeah, that's just something I learned from there. And then this Falcon versus Dimension 6 idea is, the name Nike was not one of the first ideas. It wasn't Phil Knight's favorite. When they narrowed their list down, they came down to Falcon and Dimension 6. Most of the rest of his co-founders and the early employees wanted to have Falcon as the name. Then one of them came up with, I think they had some deadline to come up with the name so that they could incorporate as an entity, business entity. And down to the wire, one of them dreamed of the word Nike, or of course Nike existed as a goddess of victory, but it came to them in a dream. It came to him in a dream, not Phil Knight, but one of the executives in a dream, to brand the company as Nike, or name the company Nike. And this just goes into the idea of branding. There's the Nike check, which is of course actually a swoosh, which is supposed to invoke this idea of speed and moving quickly. And again, Nike was the goddess of victory, so Phil Knight liked that, but initially he didn't like the name, and they just decided to go with it, and it would grow on them. And he knew that Dimension 6 was just too long of a name, and he didn't quite like Falcon, so it grew on him and it grew on the rest of the world. And then this idea of branding, something in the book is one of the first people in it is Prefontaine. He was a great runner, and a brand can be more than just, it isn't just the logo. In most cases, it's not like, a lot of people want to start with a logo and think that encompasses the entire brand, but a brand is more than that. So with Nike, it's the people, the athletes that are associated with Nike. Phil Knight isn't really like, he is the co-founder of Nike, and somewhat the face of the company, but actually the face of the company is all the athletes associated with it, which is kind of, you can contrast that against Apple, where Steve Jobs is the face of the company. People still think of Steve Jobs when they think of Apple. And some companies don't have people associated with them at all. So then there's this idea of the brand can be the products too. So this isn't covered in the book, but it's a story that's told in, I'm reading this book called Primal Branding. And in that, they do talk about Nike as well, and the Livestrong band, which was a variation of the baller bands, which just reminded me of baller bands in high school. And the summer they came out, you couldn't really get them in stores. And it was always like some friend that came back from Hawaii and went to the Nike store there, or like the Nike store in some other city, and they happened to be able to pick up some packs, and they would just sell them individually or give them to our other friends. This was before you could really... It was still a little odd to order stuff from the internet, and we were in high school, so we would have to ask our parents sometimes to use their credit cards to buy things, and it all seemed very shady at that point. Then, okay, so talked about Mount Fuji, Falcon, and Dimension 6, and then the waffle iron. So in Shoe Dog, Phil Knight talks about the development of some of the early shoes and the shoe sole. So one of the most important people in his life was his track coach and his track coach is the one that came up with the waffle iron sole. So he saw the waffle iron, got some inspiration from it, and then he was always trying to work with different materials, different animal skins, different anything like cod, fish, whatever it was, and he came up with material and tried to do different things. It's kind of that idea of like Edison tried all these different things for filaments, but in this case, they were trying different things to put in the waffle iron to create a shoe sole, and eventually they came up with something that worked. And then, kind of going back to Onitsuka, for them, inspiration came from a meal. So someone was eating octopus. They looked at the tentacles or squid, and looked at the tentacles and thought, okay, that might be good to use as a shoe sole. So different places for inspiration for the same thing. A shoe sole coming from a waffle iron, and squid seems to come from food for some reason. And then this is a little bit more random. Just sometimes the ideas can, like, going from a squid tentacle to a shoe sole is kind of a stretch. And it just reminded me of like Bruce Lee and then these fighting games in the 90s. So with Street Fighter, they had Fei Long, who was just a complete ripoff of Bruce Lee. And then Tekken had Martial Law, again another ripoff of Bruce Lee. So it's just something that came to mind. So sometimes the connection isn't so tenuous. It's just a straight ripoff. And then this idea of combining ideas. So maybe you could think of different ideas and combine Falcon and Dimension 6. And now you have this Space Falcon. But this more looks like some kind of headdress instead of a black hole going to another galaxy. Anyway, that's one way. You could combine ideas to come up with a new idea, or you could just rip them off. So, for example, these book notes and this format of going through 9 connections really is just a different way, like, it's mind mapping, and then it's combining kind of like mind mapping and crazy eights. So it's just structured mind mapping to generate ideas, and we'll see how it goes. I kind of like doing this, so I hope you liked it too. Thanks for checking this out. I'll do some more books in the future. Hit subscribe if you want to check them out later.